Yeah, so I request everyone to go to their Kaggle account right now. And once you go to your account, I want you to click on this particular account. Like basically, can you go to this URL? Like, firstly, just go to this place, your account, my account, basically. The reason being, we'll be using the Keras API here. We'll be using the Kaggle API today. I want you to create a new API token. You'll be uploading this into your notebook today. So because of which I want you to download a API right now, a API token right now. And once you're done, please feel free to put it in the chat that you've downloaded it, because then I can proceed to the next step. Great. Others, just go to my account again on your Kaggle account and create a new API token. If you've already created an API token, that's great. But if you want to create it again, you can do so by clicking this button here. And if you've ever done it before, I suggest you expire all the previous API tokens. You just create a new one altogether so that there are no issues. Okay, so let's proceed and go to the notebook, and I'll show you how to upload this Kaggle API token so that you can download the data. Uh, so once you're, I guess you've already downloaded the data, right? And when you've downloaded the zip file, you'll have this particular notebook called Keras CNN tutorial. I really want you to upload it onto Colab so that I can proceed, and so that we can both run the code simultaneously. And if you have doubts, you can ask me. Particularly if you see that in the second step, right, you can see that we need to upload a file here. So this is where we'll be uploading our Kaggle JSON, which we've just downloaded, so that your Colab understands that this is the account it's linked to, and there is a direct transfer of the file from Kaggle to Colab. Usually the files for most of these CNN tasks end up being pretty big, from 400 to 500 MB, or probably a GB as well. So it's nearly impossible to upload it manually. So Kaggle gives you this API, because of which it becomes much simpler that you can use it directly. And so can I start? Uh, just reply yes or something so they can move on. Is everyone okay, cool. I hope everyone's already downloaded the notebook, so I'll be starting right now. First of all, what happens is on Kaggle, on your Colab, the library of Kaggle is usually outdated, and sometimes you might get an error. So we'll just force install this library so that it is up to date. It's common to have some incompatible errors, that's fine. Okay, so this is exactly where we'll be uploading our JSON we just downloaded from Keras. Just upload your kaggle.json file. And once you've uploaded your kaggle.json, you can see that this particular cell has run, like in the sense you've uploaded it, because of which like you can move ahead, because now most of these steps are starter code for trying to download the data. So here you're giving permissions to your root to upload this particular file there so that you can download the data again. Today we'll be doing a binary classification problem. that is a simple cat and dog classifier based on the images, you see that the data is nearly 800 MB. So it's always preferable to use this method to get the data onto your Colab. Yeah, for you, I think you'll get a few steps saying you'll have to download. I mean, you can see the process happening. I already have a copy, because of which I don't have to do it. You'll have a file called dogs versus cats.zip file, which is nearly 800 MB downloaded onto your uh, Colab. So as part of your lab as well, we'll be doing a similar process. I think we'll launch the lab tonight, or I think tomorrow. We'll let you know at the end of the session. So you'll have to basically download the data directly from Kaggle. I think the data set is 400 MB-ish, and the folder also has subfolders. So it's necessary that you unzip your data. So on Colab, there are a few shortcuts. So you can convert your shell to a bash shell by just adding this command, and then this folder is called content, right? So you will cd to that particular folder, and then you'll unzip the file there. I mean the zip file there. I don't need to do that because I already have it. I think it'll take a minute to unzip all the files. So this is a binary classification problem, and the lab will be based on a multi-class classification problem, and you will have 6 classes, and we'll get to know more about the problem soon. But yeah, just mentioning it so that you're prepared. Uh, let's do a little bit of theory so that you understand why we use CNNs particularly.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, apparently they are having some error, 403 error by downloading the dataset. You know why or something?
Okay, cool. 1 second. Particularly in which line did you have the problem, in the sense, like the Kaggle competition, this one, right? So I just ask you once more, is your Kaggle JSON called Kaggle1.json or Kaggle2.json? Like the name of the file should be Kaggle.json because it recognizes that this particular notebook. So because of which, if you have a different name, or if you've downloaded the JSON twice or something, you might end up having this error. Also, in case you feel that you're not able to cope up with this particular notebook, I also have uploaded a PDF of the whole run notebook, so you can read through that at the same time. But mainly the error will be in that itself, that the name of your file, right, the kaggle.json should be kaggle.json, because uh, I've also had this error in downloading data sometimes, because usually it is your name mismatched, or probably because your Kaggle library, which is installed on pip, right, is an older version. So it's either one of them. So you can force install it, or you can change the name to Kaggle.json and then upload it again to the files or upload directory.
Hey, hello. I think we need to join the competition. So that's the main error. Which one is it?
Oh, I'm sorry. What did you say? Oh, okay, cool. So basically, since this competition, basically the data on this dog versus cats competition needs your permission. I think you have to first go to that particular competition and accept the conditions that you want to take part in the competition. Just give me a minute. I'll just send you the link. Just 1 minute. Uh, I've uploaded the link in the chat. You'll have to go to this link and accept the condition that you want access to the data. Because if you say yes, I accept, then only you'll be able to download the data. Like I didn't have this problem since I'd already done it. Rowan asks, where do I get kgl.json from? Cool. Uh, just go to this link first and uh, accept that you're joining the competition, and then I'll tell you how to download the kgl.json again. Again, basically, if you have a GPU in your laptop, you don't have to do all this process. You can download the data directly from this link and move ahead. But this particularly for people whose laptops don't have GPU and who wants to, like basically whoever wants to use the Google Colab tool, right? So then you will have to go through this process. Once you've done, once you've accepted that you want to take part in this competition, just let me know. I'll move ahead. Yes, Shreyas, there's a direct way. You can just go to that competition and I'll show you. If you go to this competition, if you go to the data, you usually have a prompt saying, do you want to take part in this competition, etc., and all of that. But if you want to download the data to your local, right, you can always press this download all button here, and you'll have 812 MB worth data on your local. But if you want to use the Kaggle API, right, and download the data directly to Colab, then you can use this command here, which I've already mentioned in your Colab. But first of all, you need to accept the entry to this competition to be able to download it. You can use the Kaggle itself directly to do the labs. That's not an issue. It's just that sometimes people have issues on Kaggle as well. And yeah, I think you can do that directly. You can do it on Kaggle itself. There's no issues. Since the directory or the folder with all the data is on Kaggle, you can just use a Kaggle notebook itself and do the labs. So can I move ahead? RK? Yeah, Januja, ask. No, it's not. It's for this lab session, for the practice lab, or like this particular lab. Evaluative lab is different, and I'll let you know. I think we'll announce it by 9 tonight. This is not the evaluative lab. Yeah, just join this competition so that you're able to perform this practice lab. If nothing works out, I'll just use some inbuilt data like the MNest or probably the flowers data set. It's just that I wanted to use an external data set so that you'll be able to perform like the evaluative lab without any problem. Because the data is custom one, right, for the evaluative lab, and people usually have issues trying to get the data. Because writing a model is not that hard. You can just add convolution layers and get done with it. The pre-processing takes, yeah, cool. So I'll be moving ahead. Firstly, why do we need CNNs? So basically, you can always use the artificial neural network also to classify an image. But what happens is, if I have a 28 cross 28, like, take this example for a matter of fact. If you have a 32 cross 32 cross 3 image, right? So that's basically a 32 cross 32 image with RGB filters, so because of which it's 3072 parameters. And to start off, you'll have a fully connected layer. That is, you'll have 3072 neurons. So basically, the parameter width, right, the size, and ends up being 14 million parameters. And we lack the computation power to be able to perform such huge computations. At the same time, uh, the pixels, right, the fundamental of an image, are all spatially related, because of which you lose that spatial context when you are performing operations on an artificial neural network. So that's why we are using CNNs. Yeah, location information will be lost in our feed-forward neural network, so that's why we do it. Cool. The structure of a CNN is very simple. Given an image, right, you have to pass it through a convolutional neural network, and depending on whether you need a activation layer or not, you can pass a activation layer. And you also have pooling. I'll be explaining max pooling, average pooling, and min pooling as part of this lab. So you use pooling to especially reduce the size of your image. So it's like downsampling your image. So that's why you use pooling. And a set of convolution layers will help you overall reduce the size of your image, at the same time uh, take up those features in your image which are most relevant. Like, for example, if I have a pixel value which is very high, it is more important for me to keep such values depending on the spatial relations of the image. Yeah, there are convolution layers and the pooling layers. Am I audible again? I forgot to ask that. I'm audible, right? Cool. So convolution, I think you've already covered by MITSIM what it is and mathematical operation, but let me just like run through it. It's basically keeping the filter on top of an image and performing dot product and getting the answers. So you multiply 0 with -1, 25 with 0, and so on. And you get these values, and then you sum it up, and basically that's how you get the final value 335 for one operation. Similarly, a lot of people have problems here. If it's a three-dimensional image, what do you do? So it's the same thing, except you perform the operation, the dot product with, so basically if you have a three-dimensional image, you'll also have a three-dimensional filter. So that's something to keep in mind. Like, for example, here it's 3 cross 3. So if, depending on the number of dimensions of the image, the filter also changes. So here it is 3 cross 3 cross 1. So if it's a colored image, it will be 3 cross 3 cross 3. So it'll be initialized based on random numbers using NumPy, and then back propagation, these weights, these values of the filters are updated so that you can learn the most relevant filters. And one important thing is the bias. So there is a variable called bias which is added to your values. So convolution of this particular filter with this part of the image gives you 335, 75, and so on. This is basically how spatially it looks. You can see that you started off with a 5 cross 5 image, and then you'll end up getting approximately a 3 cross 3 image after convolution. I'll explain the math behind why it happened and how do you derive it. And yeah, so in case you do have a bias, you just end up adding it at the end to every pixel value here to get the final output. This is just, I've uploaded the slides as well, so you can check it up anytime later. And this is cool. Yeah, padding. So what happens when, why do you need padding? Yeah, so basically what happens sometimes is that a lot of data which is present, especially on the corners, right? Like for example, the 75 here. The original image basically contains 75, 80, 80, and so on. So to be able to access the corner and edges as well, right? You need a way to move your filter to that particular point. That is, the filter center should be able to uh, uh, so that it is how do I explain this? So basically, padding is given an image, you add a set of values onto its corners and edges. If you use zero padding, basically you add zeros everywhere, particularly so that you can uh, convolute from basically you, if you don't use padding, you end up missing out on trying to perform convolution on all the edges and the corner pixels. So to be able to do so, you use this. And also sometimes when you have cases where you have a bigger filter, suppose you have a 5x5 filter, you're actually missing out on 2 rows and 2 columns, which are, I mean, 4 rows and 4 columns in overall, the edges, right, which is present on every side. So because of which you'll need 2 layers of padding then, and basically padding is necessary to be able to take the overall image into performance of the convolution. We lose edge information in this way. So how do we solve this problem? Padding it with a margin of 2. Cool. So here, suppose here particularly they're using a 5x5 filter. So there is a rule of thumb, which is your filter size minus 1 divided by 2 should be how many rows you should be padding your image with. So if it's 5, it should be 5 minus 1 by 2, which is 2. So that's why I'm padding it with a margin of 2. It's not necessary. You can pad it however you want. It's not going to affect your output in terms of giving it won't show an error. It will just help you enhance the performance of your network. And suppose if I give you an example of using a filter which is 7x7, so 7 minus 1 by 2, 3. So it's better to pad it with 3 so that, for example, this 5 thing, if you keep a 5x5 filter here, you see that your center of the filter is matching with the first element. So it's just basic math so that you're able to symmetrically take all the values of your image. Yeah, and after padding your image, you're able to generate the output by taking even the edges and corners into context. Stride. Stride is the amount by which the filter is moved as it passes over the image. It's basically how much you're translating at every operation. So considering this is my filter, like this blue colored thing. So once I move my filter, if my stride is 2, I'll be basically moving 2 steps forward. So my stride my filter will now be here, from here. I mean, how do I show this? Cool. I can't. But yeah, stride is basically the amount by which the filter moves. So you can control it so that you understand how much do you want to reduce the dimension by. So usually you use higher strides in bigger images. So suppose if I have a 228 cross 228 image, it's pretty big and the number of operations and parameters generated will be pretty high. So there's a formula which is the size of your image minus the size of your filter plus 2 times the padding size. So if suppose I've padded with 2 rows, my P will be equal to 2. I'll share the notes for this, but basically if given a 228 cross 228 image, it will be 228 minus 3 plus 2 times 2 divided by S. So this factor where you divide by S, right, is important because it will perform operations which are big. Like in the sense, if your stride is 2, your image is actually becoming half of the original one. And if your stride is 3, it's actually becoming 1/3 of the original one. So stride is an important number. So by default, it'll have a stride of 1. You can always change it using the Keras and TensorFlow, whichever framework you use. So the code for using a convolutional 2D layer is very simple. you again call the sequential class, and then you add a convolution layer. Since the image is a 2D object, it's important to use conv2D. There's always conv1D which you can use, but it's mostly used on signals, like it's used in signal processing, in text, particularly if you want to use, if you're using RNNs, you'll probably use conv1D to increase the context between two words next to each other and many other things. But it's very simple. So 32 here represents the number of filters I'm using. So if I give you a face recognition algorithm, a lot of different parameters have to be learned, right? Like the nose, the eyes, the lips, and a lot of tiny different features. So how do I learn it? I set a number of filters. So filters are basically kernels which perform the convolution, and depending on number of filters, so many so many features, feature representations are learned using your algorithm. And your 3x3 here is the size of your kernel or filter. I'll be calling it filter. You can always call it kernel, filter, or basically the filter which keeps moving on your image for convolution, right? So the dimension of that is 3, 3, which is basically a 3x3 filter. You can always do 3, 4, 4, 3, but it always helps to keep it symmetric because your output will also be a square. And activation is ReLU. You can use TANH as well, or any other activation, but most of the state-of-the-art architectures use ReLU, and now there's leaky ReLU as well, and a lot of new activations. You're always encouraged to use newer activations, but ReLU is one of the activations we'll be using in the lab. And input shape. It is important to give the input shape. You can always use none, 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 which none, 3. So that particular input shape will take the input as it is. Like it won't make any operations. But particularly what happens is there's a lot of noise in the data, in the sense noise here is particularly being referred to the fact that different images will have different dimensions. So a cat image could probably be 24 x 24, and a dog image is probably 48 x 16. So not all the images are of the same shape, right? So we are also part of pre-processing, try to convert all the images to the same shape so that it becomes easier for a network to perform the operations, and we'll be able to get more accurate predictions, since you don't have to do any kind of scaling there. Pooling. I think I've explained pooling, but basically max pooling does this. By default, most of the pooling technique, most of the good networks use max pooling. What max pooling does is you define a filter, right? 2x2 or something. So in this 4x4 image, a 2x2 filter particularly outputs the pixel which has the maximum value. So that's what max pooling does. The pooling layer operates independently on every depth slice of input and resizes it spatially using max operation. So here it is 1, 2, 0, and 1. So what is the maximum value here? 2. So it outputs 2. Max pooling directly downsamples the image size. So if I have a 224 x 224 image, it's downsampled to 112 x 112. You see that max pooling has a lot of power because it's reducing a huge image to nearly half its size. And by default, like for example, if you use a pooling of 2, right, a 2x2, your stride is 2. So pooling does not, it's not performing convolution, it's performing a maximum operation, and it moves 2 steps forward and then performs the pooling operation here again and outputs 3. And similarly, after performing all the operations for an image, you see that it's a 4x4 image, which is becoming a 2x2 image. That's like 1/4 of its original size. So yeah, it is a pretty important operation, and it needs to be used wisely because, and also if you see here, the spatial values are a lot of them. Now it stored the most relevant features. 2, 3, 4, 2 are the most important features in this particular image. For smaller images, you might not understand the importance, but when you go through bigger images, right, when you see the output of each of the convolution performance after each and every at a different depth, you'll understand that why it is necessary and how it is actually helping and reducing the complexity of operations as well. So overall code will look somewhat like this. Model is equal to sequential, that is calling the sequential class. And also you're always encouraged to use TensorFlow as well or PyTorch, but in TensorFlow also, there is no direct command called conv2d, but you define a particular function and call a convolution operation from the TensorFlow's nn class. So basically you'll do tf.nn.conv2d or something like that. But particularly using Keras, this is the way. You add a convolution layer of 32 filters having a 3x3 kernel or 3x3 filter, which is moving on and performing the convolutions, and activation being ReLU, and input shape being, suppose for an image it's 28x28x3, it's 28, 28, 3. If you don't add the activation, or if you don't if you forget to add some values, there are default values which are taken. Like for example, it's always 3x3, the default one, and activation is ReLU. You're free to change it. And yeah, you can add a batch normalization layer here. So batch normalization particularly is very important because I'm not sure if Basubrata ma'am covered the internal covariate shift in class, but it basically means that most of the data what you're using in an image, in pre-processing step, whatever the initial data you have, you might use a normalization function to generate a normal distribution of data with mean equal to 0 and standard deviation equal to 1, but variance equal to 1. But it's important to note that the data which is already normalized, when you pass it through different nonlinear activation functions, there's a change in the distribution, right? And your model sometimes may not be able to cope up with the sudden changes in the distribution, and it might sometimes reduce the accuracy. So batch normalization, it reversifies the effect of internal covariate shift. I'll add this into the notes as well so that you can learn more about it. It's an important concept which is very theoretical in research, but it's not necessary for the lab. But yeah, batch normalization is used for that. And the max pooling 2D performs 2D, like basically pooling, max pooling on an image with pooling size 2,2, which is explained. Dropout, just like previous ones which we've used in previous labs. It drops out 0.25 is basically 1/4 of the neurons are dropped out. Okay, cool. Let's start with the lab. Anything here? So I can move ahead, right? I can go ahead with the lab and explain it to you. I would appreciate it if someone says yes on the chat so that I can know. Cool. But okay. I'm importing all the important necessary libraries from Keras. For pre-processing, I'll be using the image data generator. This actually makes your life way more simpler because if you want to perform data augmentation, right? I'll cover that in the notebook. Image data generator does that for you. And particularly if your data is not very well arranged, right? Like it's going to be in the lab. So for example, I'll give you a zip file with a bunch of images in it. And I won't really label them as to which class it belongs to. And I'll give you a CSV to map it. Image data generator does the job. So it's making your life much simpler. A lot of people might already know that, but yeah, I just want to put that out there. And you're always free to use basic Python and file handling methods to do the same. But this is in case you're not very well versed with the same. And yeah, cool, let's move on. I'll define a few constants, like I want my image to have this dimension particularly because our images are not the same shape. Fast_run is just the random variable I've defined so that I can set the number of epochs based on it. Like in the sense, if I have better GPU, I'll probably run 50 epochs, and probably if I don't, I'll run 10 epochs. So this is something for that sake. And image size is basically 128 plus 128, and since it's a colored image, channels will be 3. I've already unzipped the data. No, I don't have. No, I haven't. No. If you run this particular command, it'll basically unzip your folders. So we'll prepare the training data. So if you see that particular training data, right, it clearly has, okay, why is it not opening? Cool, I'll just show it. The train folder particularly has 2 folders called dog and cat in it, and each of them having a bunch of images. So this function particularly here, it basically does the same. So if you see, it basically create a data frame for you. You can always change the name directly. I particularly use this function because it's much more simpler and it reduces a lot of code in my, it reduces code and stuff. Just give me a second, I don't know why it hung. I'll just get back to you in a minute. I'm just having a few issues with the internet. Just give me a minute. Yeah. So when I see the data frame, I see that the file name is such that it's cat dot bunch of numbers dot jpeg. So I clearly know it's a cat from a file name, and this is the category. So I basically represented cat with 0 and dog with 1. It's binary. If it's multi-class, represented more numbers. Yeah. So particularly this data set has 25,000 images. So because of which, if I mention the category, it has 12,500 cat images and 12,500 and 24,000 images. Cool. So for a sample image, we'll just see how our image looks. We see that this dog image is nearly 300 pixels and 220 pixels or something. And if I run it again, you can see that not all the images are of the same size, just 350 and 450. If every image is having a different shape, right, it becomes difficult in terms of computation, because at every, basically it's incomparable data. Imagine if you don't convert it to the same size, or if you have a huge image, you have a small image, they both, and this was covered earlier, but I'll mention it again in between when the training process happens. So yeah, basically all the images are of different sizes, so we have to use our data pre-processing to help get them to the same shape. And this I actually mentioned it to you, like how exactly the process is. So you perform a convolution operation here with a set of operations, and then again you add convolutions. The more hidden layers you add, you're trying to learn more deeper features, in the sense, if you visualize the filters at the end of layer 1 and layer 2 and layer 3, you'd see that at the end of layer 3, uh, the the features what you're learning are much more uh, uh, it learn more complex features, because it's passed through two non-linear activation functions, and it can uh, learn more deeper features. You can see that most of the state-of-the-art architectures are nearly 100 to 150 layers long. Like ResNet 152 is pretty long, Inception V3, and a lot of other pre-trained networks. So here, this is approximately how our architecture will look like. So we call the sequential class, and then we add a convolution layer, convolution 2D, just as I mentioned in the slides. Add the batch normalization. If we don't add a batch normalization function, it's not really going to matter. It won't really harm your results. But to enhance your performance, sometimes it's better to add batch normalization, as I explained. It depends on problem to problem. So if your data is actually not uh, there are places where batch normalization actually reduces the performance of your architecture. Some places, but that's the edge cases. You don't really have to worry about it. And max pooling particularly helps you in downsampling. And I'm dropping out 1/4 of the neurons at every particular layer, because our image is pretty big. It's 128 cross 128 image. I want to get it as I want to not overfit my training data. At the same time, I don't want to learn too much of my parameters. So I'm using a dropout which is pretty big here in CNN. And I've used 32 filters here. I've chose to use 64 and 128 filters here. This is using Cover's theorem, like in the sense, if something is not separable in nth dimension, it may be separable in more than n dimensions. So, and also the filter size, if you increase it, it's learning more parameters. It won't harm. So this is a rule of thumb. You keep changing the number of filters, and uh, it'll help you generate different number of parameters, and depending on the network you build, the performance changes. So theoretically, how you arrange them is important, but the values, it's just a rule of thumb. There is no exact way, but I can definitely tag some good Medium articles and a good number of papers which help you determine these values depending on the input shape. And yeah, so this is an important part. So this part performs the convolution, right? And you still know that at the end of this, your dimension will be a two-dimensional output. But when you want to use fully connected networks, right, that is the artificial neural network, this is incompatible. Like in the sense, how will you connect your CNNs to ANNs? What Flatten does is basically arranges your, let me write it here. It basically converts your, suppose if you have an output at this stage of 28 cross 28, 28 cross 28 cross 1, it converts it to 28 cross 28 comma 1. So it basically, like imagine you have a 4 cross 4 image. You take a row, you take the next row, and you concatenate with the first one. So you basically arrange the pixels row wise, and you'll have a single vector now of n. Suppose you have an n cross n image, you'll have a n square cross 1 flattened output. So after you flatten your particular output from CNN, you can add your dense neurons. So now it's basically a fully connected network after this, in the sense your output from here is connected to 64 neurons, each and every one of them. And then you can add more hidden layers if you want. And this is just an artificial neural network, just like how we did in lab 1. And this is important. So since this is a binary classification problem, your neurons is 2. Depending on number of classes, you replace this with the number of classes. And you can always use sigmoid here and use normal loss function. But I just wanted to show that you can use softmax and categorical cross entropy also to do the same, because binary cross entropy is just a subset of categorical cross entropy for 2 classes. And yeah, someone asked me a doubt in during the evaluative lab previous one, that when do you use sparse categorical cross entropy? Yeah, so basically if you're one hot encoding your Y label, right? Like for example, if you have a 6 class classification problem, so you will have something like 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, like one hot encoded output. So if you don't want to one hot encode your output, right, particularly the label, then you can use it as it is. Like in a sense, if the labels are 0, and if it's like mountain, tree, fox, something like that, replace them with numbers by label encoder and use it as it is, and use a sparse categorical cross entropy loss, so that you don't have to one hot encode it. That's where you use that loss function. And I think even the network gives you a warning when you're using it, that it suggests you to use sparse categorical cross entropy. And today I also wanted to point out that if you want to use different optimizers and metrics, you can definitely go to the Keras website, and it has a lot of different loss functions. So I suggest you to use the documentation. Like you can use mean squared error, mean of absolute error, and a lot of different ones. Like since you can theoretically understand how each and every one of them work and use that in your network, and not just stick to ADAM or RMS prop. You can even change the learning rate of your optimizer using the documentation. Yeah. Callbacks. Last time we covered early stopping. So early stopping, as you know, that in case your loss is not actually reducing after n epochs, that is your patience level, then you stop your model there and you move ahead. So the early stopping does that. Now there's something called learning rate reduction. It is important because what happens is sometimes most of the times the number of the learning rate is given manually, and you don't really know how to like set the learning rate. If it's a machine learning problem, you can obviously use grid search or something, and then give a bunch of learning rates, and within a matter of 2-3 minutes, you will have which is your best parameters, and then you'll get your great accuracies, and that's amazing. But in CNNs, it takes a lot of time to perform operations on your image. you can't perform a grid search unless you have like a very high performing RAM so that you can load your images and so on. So it's better to have a patience level, that is after 2 steps also, if my accuracy is not increasing or if my learning rate is, I mean, if my loss is not decreasing or whatsoever, you can use this function reduction LR on plateau, which will help you set a learning rate, which will be reduced every time your loss is not really changing. So we use that as well. I'm just introducing you to newer things so that you can explore them during the labs. Yeah. One important thing. So at the starting of this lab, I mentioned something called image data generator, right? So for image data generator, it requires the data of your data frame needs to be of the type string. So it is like, for example, now my data here, data category head is numbers. Either I can convert my numbers to string or I can just replace it with cat or dog, because in the end, if my answer is just cat or dog, I'd rather do it at this step itself. So that's what I'm doing here. Or you could just convert these numbers to string by doing dot as type int, I mean str. That's always something you can do. And yeah, so here I'm splitting my train set for validation. So I'm setting 20%. So that means 24,000 is how much? 4,800 images. But I think I had 25,000 images. So that's 5,000 images. Yeah, so my train set now has 10,000 and 10,000 images. So that's 20,000 in my train set, and validation is 5,000. You can check that here. And yeah, this is important. So why do I particularly use image data generator? So image data generator is important since it performs data augmentation. So what happens is most of the filters, whatever you learn, right, it's based on spatially understanding where things are. So suppose if I have a picture of an office, right, so it's particularly in between the image. So the filter learns values such that it's always in between. So what if I give you a picture of an office which is horizontal, like in the sense we don't have a good clear input. So our model might not perform to the best, because of which it is important to perform data augmentation. So particularly we perform translations. Okay, what is it? Translations, rotations, and basically if you have a simple dog image, you see that we've performed different kind of augmentations, and we're using this kind of input so that there's enough noise in your data, so that it's also that your model is not overfitting, and at the same time it's learning more noisy data. Basically, you're trying to build a better model. If you don't use data augmentation also, your model will perform good, but sometimes you may have to use data augmentation. So depending on situations, feel free to use data augmentation. So I chose to use data augmentation here. So image data generator, I set the rotation range, and all of these are available in the documentation. So how do you change it, or what exactly do you do? Like whether I'm zooming it, or if I chose to horizontally flip it or not. If I make it false, it won't be flipped horizontally. So on, like you can set these parameters however you want. So I'm using the same generator for the train set and validation set. So basically it performs all these operations. And yeah, some people tend to make mistakes, that is they perform the same operations on the test set as well. So here's the thing, your test set is something you predict on. Why would you want to make changes to your test set by augmenting it? You don't really have to, right? Like you're predicting the output for those images. Unless it's a necessity, don't try to use it. But yeah, that's the important thing. And so yeah, this is an important thing. So I'll explain how exactly do you give data here. So the data frame which we generated on the top, right, like the cat and dog data frame, you input it using this particular function. There's also something called flow from directory, in the sense if your data frame is not having the labels, and your directory is, like in the sense your train set already has directories, like in the sense there's a cat folder, there's a dog folder, there's a monkey folder. So you can flow it directly from directory then. So there are two different possibilities for image data generator. And again, I suggest you to use the Keras documentation to go through it. Here I'm giving the directory particularly which has the train set or the train data, the images. So this basically does the mapping for you. It maps your data frame to the image so that it can do the operations. And yeah, here you're setting the X column and Y column for understanding what you're predicting, right? Your category, obviously. And it's a categorical problem. So class mode is that you have binary and you have, I think, sparse, and you have different class modes as well. So here it's a categorical one. So this is what we're doing. And batch size, it's always good to have a, uh, uh, for example, it depends on number of images. We have 20,000 images here. If you have a smaller batch size, in batch gradient descent, so many images are being taken input at the same time and loss is calculated for that particular batch. If your batch is too small, it will take a lot of time to perform your operations. So decide your batch size based on that. I do the same for validation set. I had a train test bit of 20%, right? So this is for 20,000 images, and this is for 5,000 images. You might have errors here. For example, found 20,000 validated image files belonging to two classes. So if you don't perform this well, you'll usually get an error saying found 0 from 0 classes. So even so basically keep track of that. If you basically get that error, you won't have any problems, but at the end you'll realize that your network is not running. And to clarify that error, you can come back to this particular place and make the necessary changes. So keep that in mind. And yeah, that's it. So we'll see how our generator works. So what exactly this image data generator is doing. So I'm just taking a random example from the train set and I'm performing the augmentation on it. So here I'm just plotting the augmentation. Okay, this is not a good picture. Let me change. How did it not change? Cool. It's not randomized, right? It is. Funny, but cool. Use has 12 batch. Interesting. Oh wait, so this is where am I changing the batch? Anyway, basically, you can always randomly generate an image. That's not a problem. But basically, I'm not sure if you can see it clearly. It's a very weird dog. But yeah, you see that the dog is facing towards the left, but here it's right, and it performed the augmentation operations based on the inputs I gave, the parameters. Feel free to change it. Yeah, the fast and variable I said previously is for this case, like in the sense, now we'll turn 10 epochs. That's about it. So for example, this is something different from what we used in the first lab. We did model.fit in the previous labs, but we now will do model.fit underscore generator because the data generator will generate an object of a particular kind and model.fit can't take that input. So model has another parameter called model.fit. So you use this particular one if you're using a generator or like an image data generator function. If you don't use data augmentation, you can directly do model.fit and pass your training images without any problem, just like how we did previously. Here I'm just setting the epochs and a set of things. Yeah. Since the image is pretty big and I'm running 10 epochs, it will take time. So I'm not going to run this now. But I tried running it previously and it took me approximately around 20 minutes to run one epoch. Don't worry, the images for the evaluative lab won't be that big, but yes, since it will take some time, I'll just let you know that what exactly happens in the sense, it will take some time to run an epoch, but after a few number of epochs, right, you'll get your output and you see that your accuracy is around 65 and validation is 73. So that's good. Like in the sense, I'm not overfitting my data. I've used so much batch normalizations, but yeah, this particularly will fit the data on your particular network. I'll run it for a second because I need to test it on the test data. So it has to learn something at least. So I'll let it run an epoch, but this is one step where it will usually take a lot of time. And as we go with further evaluative labs, like for example, LSTMs take much more time to train, and sometimes even Colab can't handle it. In the sense, you'll have to use Google Cloud or like some other place to handle your uh, operations, which is usually why we give simpler data sets so that it doesn't become difficult. But yeah, just for sake of it. It's taking 2 minutes. That's good. We'll just run one epoch so that I can show you for the test set as well, so I can predict it. Yeah, and also, yeah, someone asked. No, Ritvik. So basically, I thought we could use transfer learning in the sense, uh, like there are a lot of people who don't know transfer learning, right? Because of which it happens that you might do really well in labs and they might not, and like it's something we can't help you with in the sense like you can always replicate the architecture of pre-trained networks, but you can't use transfer learning as well. Uh, like, do you mean like you want to use VGG, which is trained on imaginary data set, and then just perform transfer learning and get your answers? Then no, you can't do that. But you can always look at the different layers of VGG and try to replicate it using your code. We always appreciate that. But you can't use pre-trained models for this lab. That's cool. Yeah, and one very, very important point. This lab, after it's completed, you submit your notebook, that's great. But to evaluate the fact that you perform the lab yourself and not someone else, or you've not shared your CSVs, we want you to save your model. So model.save weights saves all the weights. For example, just like I explained previously, right, during backpropagation, whatever weights are generated, mol.saveights will retain all those values or those numpy arrays and save it in this file called model.h5. And you'll have to provide us with this particular h5 file because then only we'll be able to verify that this particular accuracy occurred because of these weights. So at every iteration, feel free to save it. And if you feel that that was your best performance, save it permanently and make sure you submit it during the evaluation. And you'll need to write the code such that we'll be able to place in this mol.h5 file and get the output. This is again simple because model.save weights will save the weights, and there's something called model.load or load weights. I'm not really sure, but that will basically help you load the particular weights. So this will basically help you. Basically, when you load the weights which are saved already, you don't have to perform this computation. That this 10 epochs won't run. The weights will be taken from this particular h5 file, and the accuracy will be generated. You can see that here the accuracy is improving because image is big. It will take at least a few number of epochs to boost your accuracy because it's trying to at first iteration it randomly initialized all the filters, right? So it's learning and you can see the loss is decreasing. I think this particular model, since it's pretty uh, big, I think it has around 3 million parameters. It's a pretty big architecture, and this can go up to 85%, 87%. And at this point of time, I also want you to know that in a multi-class classification problem, it is important to note that accuracy for this lab is cool, but accuracy as a metric is sometimes misleading. So we use something called F1 score to understand how all the classes are performed, so that it doesn't look like you're overfitting only on one particular class and rest of them are failing miserably. Because for example, if I have a lot of ones and like if I have a lot of cats and very less dogs, my accuracy of predicting all cats will be very high, right? But I will not be able to predict the same number of dogs. But accuracy as a metric will say something like 70%, but it's not really 70% because if I give you only dog images, your accuracy will be zero, like very less, right? Because your model is not very well trained to perform on that as well. So F1 score is something which will help you do this operation. In the sense, it will help you uh, understand a weight. It's a weighted function. It's a weighted mean of precision and recall at each and every stage. So I will again write this in the notes and share it with you. I think I'll stop it here. Yeah. So we have learned something and model.save underscore weights saved it. So I think if you go to the folder here, you'll be able to see a model.hy file, and it should be not a very big file. It's 6 MB. So you can always download a 6 MB file and share it with us. So yeah, the other problem of using pre-trained weights is that most of these pre-trained weights are like a GB or I think 600, 700 MB. People tend to use it and then like they're not able to share their weights and it usually messes up the evaluation. So we're not using pre-trained weights for that reason also. And obviously there's no learning in pre-trained weights, right? In the sense like you're not learning how to build an architecture. You're just using pre-trained weights to predict. Like it's a shortcut which most people use for competitive data science. But here we want you to learn how to build the architecture. So no pre-trained weights, pre-trained networks as well. Yeah. Here I don't think so. I'll see a plot. Yeah, I won't see anything because I didn't equate I didn't complete the process, right? I stopped it in between. So if I perform all three epochs, I'll be able to properly see my plots and everything. And now preparing the test set, like most of this code is replicable for the evaluative lab as well. So yeah, just like how I used pre-trained data generator, just like how I used data generator previously, I'll use it here as well for test set. And like as I told you, right, don't augment your test set because you're messing up your own input for predictions. So I'll just rescale it because the predictions previously are done based on rescaling. So like rescaling is basically converting your pixel values from 0 to 255 to a value between 0 and 1. And yeah, it found 12,500 validated image files. So the predictions are done on this. And yeah, model.predict generator will predict the output. This will probably take some time because it's 12,500 images and the batch size, I think the number of steps, right? This will help you understand how fast your predictions are. Anyway, but I think we are mostly done here. And this is a bit of code to visualize the filters and stuff like that. Like in the sense, if you won't be able to really understand much, but if you visualize it here and if you want to read more about it, you can always use the Stanford's CS231N course, and they have a blog. I'll share the link with you. It'll help you understand how the convolutional neural nets are learning much deeper, have a much deeper understanding with more layers and stuff. Yeah, the predictions are made, and let's see what kind of data is. You see that since we've used softmax, it gives a probability. The addition of these two is equal to 1. So I'll use np.argmax. NumPy has a function called argmax. It will take the maximum argument which is there in each class and give that as an output. This mostly is giving out ones, zeros. Like if the first class is the highest, first class is the highest. So make sure your model does not overfit also. And I think this. Basically the submission is a CSV file, right? So this mostly does it. So replace it with the necessary rows, necessary headings, and you'll get your CSV. And I think I'm done here. If you have any doubts, feel free to ask me on Meet. Anyone has any doubts, I can repeat it.
Did you interrupt the fitting part, or how did you finish it so quickly?
So yeah, let me go back to it. if you see that you can always change the number of epochs here. So there are 3 epochs or 10 epochs, right? So the fast run is right now false. So if false, run 10, right? So basically now epochs is equal to 10. I have to run 10 epochs. Now if I like Jupyter Notebook has this functionality, right? You can stop the notebook whenever you want, correct?
Yeah.
So whenever you stop the notebook, the learning till then is taken. In the sense, it's not voided. In the sense, after 3 epochs, it learned something, right? When you stop this cell, it's not like everything's going to be 0 again. So whatever it has learned till then is retained. So like, for example, after 3, like you approximately perform 2 epochs, right? So the weights, whatever is learned is after 2 epochs. You can always do that. You can pause your kernel whenever you want, because you can't always run it till the end, right? Sometimes you might make this mistake that you give 100 epochs, but you don't want to run 100 epochs. Is that clear?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and but the disadvantage of this is that you can't visualize your you can't visualize your epochs, because the same cell, right, performs the visualization also, because history is equal to model.fit generator, and we're plotting a few variables like accuracy and everything from history. So unless you don't want the plots, you can always pause it in between. This is a shortcut to stop your model from running in between. You don't have to run it till the end. So suppose if I restart my kernel, it will start from the 3rd epoch directly. In the sense, here it says 1, but if you see, accuracy is already boosted to 79%, which is impossible if it had already started from scratch, right? That is because the weights are retained in your in your RAM or local memory. So you can always stop it. I can again stop it, and I can start it. It's like a pause button. So it's going to start from there itself. It's not going to start from 50s, like how we started from scratch. And when you pause it, the weights written in this model variable, right? That is what is going to be used on test set. So that's how I stop the learning. Any other doubt? I'm not sure if we, but we already have 24,000 images. Then why do we need image data generator for data augmentation? Kush, we don't really need it. I just use it this lab so that people are aware of the fact that it exists. Kush is right here in the sense, like, if you have enough data, you don't really need to augment your data. Data augmentation is mostly used when if you have very limited data and you want to replicate your data such that you don't repeat the same data since it will overfit, but you want to increase the quantity of your data, so you tend to use data augmentation there. Yeah. But yeah, sometimes people use image data. Basically here, if you don't use data augmentation also, that image data generator will help you resize your image. At least to use that, I used image data generator. Like, if not anything else, at least resizing the image to 0 to 1 range. Any other doubt? How did you guys fix the 403 error? I think a few of you still have the doubt, right? The Kaggle one, how did you fix it? Are you guys still here? Like, do you want me to? Actually, I think let Arkil, what I remember, you cannot load all the images at once at RAM, so you need this for. Not really, like in the sense, probably you're right. I can read up and let you know, but I think the batch size is necessary, right? In the sense, whatever your batch size is, that will determine how much images are loaded at once to your RAM. So if your batch size is 2, it's usually reduction of batch size which will help you determine how much images or data you're loading to RAM. But I might be wrong here, but yeah, if anyone else knows, feel free to correct me, but yeah. Arkil, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I think you can take over, like in the sense I'm done with this
Okay.
lab.
Yeah. Maybe you can stop presenting so that.
Yeah, I'll do that. Collab provides 12 GB of RAM, so I don't think that would be the case. Actually, it's funny that CNNs it's not necessary, but I think the moment you get into LSTMs, right, what happens is if you're using a lot of LSTMs, like if you're using 64 cells or something like that, Collab's 12 GB of RAM is not enough. Sometimes like what happens is there are enough parameters generated that if you try to load a lot of sentences, like especially if you're performing multimodal, like if you're using text and images, right? So sometimes Colab itself tells, do you want to use our 16 GB or 24 GB RAM as well? So like it all depends on how many emails you're loading at once. I think batch size will do that. Keeping a lower batch size will always help Colab handle it, but again, Kush is right. Cool. I'll stop presenting here. Thank you.
Hi everyone, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
And can you see this screen?
Yep, we can see the
Can you
demo
see
lab.
the demo lab 3?
Yeah.
So I've uploaded this on Piazza. You don't actually need to go there and download it right now. Let's just follow it along with me. Okay, so what we'll be doing right now is it's a 10-way image classification task, and we'll solve it using PyTorch, right? So, what I wanted to show you guys is the structure that we are going to give you in your evaluative lab, which is usually followed, is like this: that you have a lot of train images in your train folder, you have a lot of test images in your test folder, and then you have CSV file, right? So what we do is for PyTorch, how to go about it is this way. I define a class, right? This is my training data set. And then what I do is I define a name frame which will consist of the names of my images and the labels of those images. This I'm reading from the CSV file, right? Basically, use calls is the range of which columns I am selecting. And then I have my root directory, which is, in this case, I'm just talking about the train file, right? I'm just talking about the train data set. So which will be my train folder. And then, so in PyTorch, in Torch Vision, basically Torch Vision gives us this transform functionality, right? You can use that to transform your images. So over here, I'm just trying to make them to tensor so that we can use PyTorch. As you guys know, whenever you want to load something or use the models on PyTorch, you need to convert everything to tensors. Okay. So basically, this class, whenever I call this is my train set, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a train data loader, right? And then I'm going to pass this class object train set to this data loader. So what is going to happen is right now the batch size is 1. So each time it is going to give one image, opening it from that folder along with its label, right? So it is going to return an image and a label. Are you guys following here? Is the internet connection fine right now? Uh, I don't know whether that's a joke, Mallar. Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so right now what I'm trying to show you is how, okay, fine. This is okay, this is trivial. This is just how to display an image, and data augmentation already are covered, so I'm going to skip that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use CIFAR 10, right? This is a standard dataset. For image classification, it has 10 classes. These are the classes: plane, car, bird, cat, deer, dog, right? And as you can see, I'm going to use my train data loader with a batch size of 4 to load. So basically, standard libraries provide us ways to use such standard data sets. So over here, I can just import the CFAR10 dataset using .vision.datasets.cfar10. But if you have something custom, like you are going to have in your lab, then what you are going to do is like I showed you above, right? So for now, you can assume is your data loader, your train loader has the train images, and your test loader has the test images. Right? So I just wanted to write very minimalistic code, so I have not written anything regarding validation, but I'm sure you guys are qualified enough now to write it yourself. Okay, so the way you are going to define your CNN model is just like what we did for the MLP model, right? You have your class CNN model, and what I am going to do over here is, so this is my first convolution layer, which is nn.conv2d. So this is how you call the first convolution layer. And the arguments are this is the number of input channels, this is the number of output channels, and this is the kernel size, right? So number of input channels is 3. You have in the usual image RGB, right? And what I say is that I want my number of output channels to be 6 and my kernel size to be 5. And there are further arguments over here. You can add padding, you can add striding, etc., etc., right? Then I have a pool layer. I'm defining a max pool 2D, which is a 2 cross 2. Right? Then I have my second convolution layer, and then after those, I am going to have my fully connected layer. So can you guys see what I've done here? So basically, what I'm going to have is 16 cross 5 cross 5 number of features over here, right? At the end of the final convolution layer. So I'm going to put a linear layer over there, which is going to flatten it, and then I want to transform it to 120. Then I have further 2 more layers, taking it to 84 and then to 10, right? So 10 because basically we are going to have 10 classes, right? And I'm not going to use softmax over here because the way it works in PyTorch is if you use cross entropy loss, the cross entropy loss in PyTorch is a combination of log softmax and cross entropy loss. So you don't have to actually do anything over here regarding softmax, right? And then I'm going to write my forward method over here. So basically, this is my X, this is the image that I'm going to get at any point of time. I'm passing it through my first convolution layer, and then after that, I'm passing it through my ReLU, and then I'm taking the pool, right? I'm going to do the same thing for the second convolution layer, after which I'm going to change the dimension of X to make it the final dimension to be 16 cross 5 cross 5, and after which I'm going to pass it through 2 normal layers, right? So this is very straightforward. This is almost what we did for a normal MLP. Just the only difference that we have over here, that we have in this whole class, is that I'm now using conv layers and max pool layers, right? The rest of the deal is same, everything, the logic is same, right? After which I'm going to define my model object, right? This is a model, CNN model. And I'm going to define my loss and optimizer. So loss is cross entropy loss, and I'm going to use Adam. My learning rate is going to be 0.01. Then for now, let's say if I select number of epochs to be 2, I want to train my model on this. So for how many number of epochs, what I do is this is exactly what we did for the MLP case. I'm going to take each data point, howsoever batch size at each point of time. Then so basically this is batch size number of data that I'm getting at every iteration. And then I'm going to zero grad my optimizer, pass it through my model, calculate the loss, do the backprop, and then let my optimizer take the step so that we can update my weights, right? And then I'm going to display after every 2000 mini batches, right? So I'm not going to run this again, but you can see that this was my loss when I started training, and it has gone down to 1.371. So the deal is pretty much very straightforward, right? It's almost exactly the same as what we did for the MLP case. The only thing that you need to worry about is how you are going to load your images to the data loader, right? this is the main thing that you need to take care of, and how you are going to define your convolution layers in the CNN model class, right? Uh, rest all is exactly the same that we did for MLP. So once you have trained it, you can save your model, right? So it can either be a .pth file or a .pt file. It doesn't matter. So this is the syntax for that. You select. So basically, what I usually do whenever I run something like this is I create a subfolder, maybe models, and then for each time I run, I just change this to model 1, model 2, and maybe add some information about what all. I'm sorry. I have a lot of doubts over here. Hmm. Okay, let me just take these doubts first. Can you explain the arguments passed to nn.conf2d? Okay, let's go through that again. So my first argument to nn.conf2d is going to be the number of input channels in the image that I'm getting. So this is going to be my input image, right? So this is my RGB image, 3 channels. After this, the second argument is my number of output channels, which I am defining in this case to be 6, right? This is up to me. And the third argument is the tunnel size, right? Which is 5 cross 5. Does that answer your question, Pepper? Uh, how did you get 84? That's my choice basically. That's an architectural choice. It's hyperparameter, right? That's what I just wanted to do. You can take anything 112. Just like we do, or just like we select the number of neurons in a MLP. Okay, to flatten. No, it's not exactly that way of looking at it. What I want to do is I just want to reshape my tensor. Yeah, Ahan answered it there. So I just want to reshape my tensor to a dimension which is going to make it easier to pass along, right? And what does it mean for output channels to be 6? For example, input channels were 3. So JJ, do you still have this doubt? What does it mean for output channels to be 6? So the way that CNN works is that uh, you have you have number of filters, right? So you define how many number of filters you are going to have in your layer. So output channels is the number of filters, right? So in this case, I'm saying that you apply 6 different filters of 5 cross 5 on my image. So that is why my number of output channels is going to be 6. Is that okay, JJ? Okay. Uh, right. So I was here. So saving the model. So each time, for your reference, I would advise that with your so whatever name you are giving to the model, you add some of these parameters. So let's say you add, let's say, epoch underscore 2, learning rate underscore 0.001, so that you can always get a measure of what hyperparameters you had used when you had trained that model. So just for your own sake, right? And then you save it this way, torch.save, and you save it in the path, and then you can load that same model. So for that, what you do is you define, let's say I define another object of my CNN model, and to that model I'm going to load the same file which I have saved over here, right? So it's pretty straightforward. So over here I have just saved that model and I have loaded that same model. Uh, So over here, I'm just testing any 4 random. My batch size is 4. So what I did is I just took one thing from my test loader, and I'm trying to predict it. So over here, you can see these are the ground truths and these are what it has predicted, which is kind of okay. Anyways, I just made it run here too. Uh, so this entire cell calculates the accuracy just like in a normal classification task. There's nothing unique over here. And so we got 51% accuracy, which was kind of okay. And you have accuracy by class. So what I'm trying to do over here is what you guys should also do is for each and every class, you should get an idea of how your model is targeting each and every class, so that you can. So let's say if I get some particular class which is performing very weakly, then you can, I don't know, enhance the number of images of that class by maybe augmenting or doing other kinds of stuff basically. So you can get that information through this cell, right? I think that is pretty much it. It's a very straightforward code, right? You can directly take this notebook and just apply it to whatever image classification task you get. Any doubts in this notebook? You can of course download it and open it and go through it once and ask me any doubts, or you can ping me later also. That's also fine. No doubts. Okay. Ahan, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I think we can go ahead and talk to them about the lab.
Yeah, okay. So, when do you think we should release the lab? Today itself, right? Tonight?
We can do it tonight. Yeah, we can do it.
Okay. So basically the task for the lab, the evaluative lab, will be a multi-class classification problem for images. There will be 6 classes particularly, and it will be held on Kaggle. And so the evaluation works like this. We're using accuracy without any newer, like it's basically categorization accuracy. And it's divided into 2 parts, right? Like public and private split. So it's 40 and 60. So keep in mind that you're not overfitting on your model because your private is bigger and your public this time. And at the same time, you have enough data to try different things since it's a big data set, but images are small, so you'll not have a problem running it. Overall, that's about it. And you can use Colab, or you can use Kaggle kernel itself for performing the lab. But one important thing is the weights part. So you have to store the weights and provide it to us so that we can verify that you're getting the output based on the weights. Like it's just for the evaluation. And yeah, I think that's about it. Akhil, you have anything else to add?
Yeah, so basically, whatever Jupyter notebook or whatever notebook you upload to Kaggle, what I'm just saying is that it should be in the same format, that it should be expecting some weights to be loaded to that notebook in order to run, right? So what we'll do is we download your notebook and your weights in the same directory, and then when we run your notebook, it should take those weights from that directory, and it should give us the output in that manner. So in this particular scenario, there's no advantage of PyTorch over Keras. Mainly, in my experience has been very limited for computer vision using PyTorch. But when I've used it for text data and NLP, I have observed that there's a lot more flexibility in terms of implementation of PyTorch over Keras, which is why when you'll see that when you come to NLP problems, or when we talk about maybe implementation with transformers, maybe, I don't know. But
there are a few things you can't change in Keras. Like for example, if you want to, like in the sense, there is functional API for you to add few things, but there is more flexibility in adding more hyperparameters and making more deeper connections. Like particularly if you're using text and images at the same time, right? You would want to perform a fewer connections which are not there in the API. You want to add it yourself. You can use TensorFlow for that, but obviously PyTorch, it's much more handy, and since it's in a class, right? It's like you're using object-oriented programming, and there's no repetitive code. It's more cleaner.
Also, there's this wonderful thing called TensorBoard. It's a TensorFlow functionality which has recently been extended to PyTorch also. I don't know whether it's there for Keras, but it makes visualization and everything so much better, and debugging also. So I will, I think, cover that when we talk about maybe some NLP problem, because I already have that code written. But yeah. I think Ahan will keep it till Tuesday early morning, the 5:30 a.m. thing, or
Yeah, I think Tuesday will be fine. I think there's enough time. This Friday, there's 5 days is there. Cool. I think Tuesday will be the deadline. We'll decide the duration soon, but Tuesday morning or evening, depending on what will be an ideal time. Do you guys have any assignments this week? Like in the sense, did ma'am, Basudata ma'am particularly give you any assignment for the weekend or something? Because we don't want to overload you, but I think Tuesday is enough. Can you keep 12 a.m. as deadline? Yeah, sure, cool. We'll keep 12 a.m. as deadline.
yeah.
I think the Kegel competition ends at UTC, right? I think, I'm not sure. So
Yeah, it does end, but I think we can control that. I'm not sure. But whatever competitions I have seen as a part of labs, you generally end at UTC 12.
yeah, yeah, but I think Tuesday is like
We'll
long
see to
enough.
it, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, there's nothing to
Group
do,
4 has
so
an
you should finish.
assignment, but that's for tomorrow, right?
Yeah,
Group 4
tomorrow will be
people?
done.
Okay.
It's done.
We have a concurrent ML lab. Since when is the ML lab and for how long? Yes.
Saturday is the deadline till 28th.
Yeah, so I guess you still have Sunday and Monday after that, right? And you have 10 submissions per day, so I don't think it should be a problem.
Also, one important announcement. This competition for this time will be private, so please avoid making fake accounts to improve your submissions or whatever. Like in the sense, we're giving you 10 submissions a day, and I think that's a lot of submissions per day. And yeah, I think that's about it. I just don't want more number of accounts and being deleted later. And yeah, just keep that in mind, because we can't justify to the teacher why those exist on the leaderboard. So it'll be better if you don't use fake accounts.
You guys have any further questions? So I wanted to ask you guys, for further tubes and labs, at least timing wise, while this lockdown is going, what are you guys? Is this timing fine? Thursday 7 to 9, Tuesday maybe 7 to 9, or you guys would like to change it? You can let me know if you want to change it. Anytime works. Okay. Great. So maybe when the lab ends on Tuesday, yeah, we'll keep a tune on Tuesday. We'll talk about RNNs then, and then after that, we'll again keep a demo lab on RNNs, and then one more evaluative lab. Can you keep the submission deadline on Wednesday? A bit earlier would be great. So one thing at a time. So Kush, would you want 5 to 7 p.m. or something? Abhimanyu? You can speak up microphone. It's fine. 5 to 7 would be better. I mean, I personally have no problem, but I think one day there is some crypto, right? Crypto lectures are there 5:30 or 6:30 or something. Crypto occurs Monday, Wednesday. Okay, fine. Then there's no. Fine. Ahan, would this be okay with you? 5 to 7 time?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Okay. Mm,
Yeah,
yes.
IST.
Okay. Fine. If there are no further doubts, I guess you guys can leave. I've uploaded we both uploaded the resources, and I've uploaded the tudes also, the tutorial 2, which was regularization and everything, and the CNN tudes also. So everything is there on Piazza. If you want to look up at the theory, and we have uploaded the demo lab, so you can choose anything. You can work with any framework that you like. That's fine, as long as you don't do transfer learning. Okay.
All the best, guys.
There's people still joining the meeting.
I didn't understand that. How did 5 people join now?
I don't. Did you record this thing?
Yeah. I'll end it now, I
So
guess.
it will go to your drive.
I think
It
it'll go
will
to
be
everyone's
saved.
drive on this call, right?
Does it?
1 second, I'll just end.